Ready? Hi. Go. Okay. I'd like to call the policy committee meeting to order at 6:33. And we have a bunch of policies for rescission and we have a bunch of 9,000 series to go over, so let's talk fast. All right, so the first policy that's up for rescission is policy 8110, purpose and role of the board. You should have notes from Shipman and Goodwin in your packet. They recommend rescinding this policy because it is redundant with policy 9210, role of boards and members, which you have a hard copy now that was just passed out, so you can review that, but it is redundant and they recommend rescission, and I agree. Thoughts, comments?
I agree with that.
Great. Okay, so we will move that forward to the board for recommendation for rescission. Next
Diane,
policy,
sorry,
yes.
just one quick thing, since this is not a board bylaw, if they're internal policies, it doesn't follow the same statute as board bylaw, you could waive the second reading if you want.
Oh, you guys want to do that? I think that's a great idea.
You can do it for all the 8,000.
Okay, so that's the next three. Unless there's a change to it that you want to change. So we will recommend waiving the second read.
I think that's our oldest policy, or at least I hope.
It's embarrassingly
This is the
old.
last time we have renewed.
It is the oldest one, I checked.
Some sort of ceremony like the flag holding ceremony. They're all younger than me now. so.
And once you get rid of all the 8,000, they'll be all younger than me, so we'll move it on.
Okay.
Doing good.
All right, so the next policy then is policy 8111, board liaison to schools. They say the policy is redundant and it was last reviewed in 1988. They recommend rescission. Any questions or thought comments to this one? I don't even know that we do this, so since it's not even something that we do, send it. We can waive the second read on this. We're all in agreement. Good.
Yes.
Okay, then the next policy is policy 8201, student representation on the Board of Ed. And I actually want to skip this one for now because we're going to be looking at under policy for review, policy 9490, student representatives. And so I kind of want to talk about them together. So for now, just set that aside. I'll put my back together here. So I put this at Kathleen Samuelson. All right. All right, so the next policy then is 9550, board hearings / appeal proceedings. Shipman and Goodwin say the bylaw is not required. They recommend repeal. In addition, it calls for hearings to be held in a fair, open, and objective manner, but does not account for situations in which hearings may need to be held in executive session. And also, Zoe and I discussed this, so most of this is covered elsewhere under different policies. So if you're talking about student discipline, it falls in the 5,000 series under the student discipline where it talks about expulsion hearings, etc. And also if you're talking about problems with transportation, that's in the transportation policy. So there wasn't really anything that we could see that that we would need this policy because it's covered elsewhere.
I was trying to think, in addition to transportation, disciplinary, what other kinds of hearings would there be? And then we have clearly written policies as the procedures for each one.
Residency.
Yeah.
So
I think members of the faculty, staff have contractual agreements to have
proceedings,
agreements
yes, right.
proceeding held publicly, well, in executive session.
And then I think beyond that, you could have somebody appeal my decision based on policy. So if somebody was arguing the the graduation policy or our interpretation of that, they could ask for a board hearing, but I don't think we need a general one. I think we can handle it just like our other.
Right, and so at worst case, we could like agree to the procedures at that particular hearing, right? If it's not specified, okay, great.
All right, so this is a 9,000 series, so we're not going to waive the second read. At least I would recommend that we don't. But is everyone in agreement that it can be rescinded?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right, and then the next policy up for rescission is policy 9850, board member insurance and liability. This is covered by state law, and Shipman and Goodwin recommend rescission. Any comments or questions regarding this policy?
Did we cite the Connecticut law or statute? I mean, just for peace of mind. I know it's there somewhere. You can Google it once or twice.
1394 or something like that.
There are a couple of main laws, but a lot of it's based on case law. Actually, I reviewed this today in the Bible known as Tom Moody's book. And you'll see as you go through those sections talking about liability, indemnification, et cetera, there's a lot of case law cited, so you can figure it's always constantly being updated. So the best thing is to refer to current law.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
So,
It's something that's based on case law too, because it's indemnification of municipal employees.
Okay.
so, I mean, do you feel that you want to have something stated like that somewhere, or?
Not particularly, I mean, if it's in state law, obviously it overrides, but just,
I mean, sometimes Shipman and Goodwin are like, they'll just say what the state statute is, and it's kind of redundant, but they do it. And then in other cases, they're like, you don't need this because it's state
Right.
statute. So this is one of those cases where they say you don't need it because it's
Yeah.
state law.
yeah. I-
So, but maybe it's like because it's more than one law, more than one case, and they're
Yeah.
not gonna list everything.
I didn't hit the control F and Connecticut Moody's book, so should have.
All right, so are we good with rescinding this policy then? Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so, and again, that's a 9,000 series that will require a 2/3 vote by the board, so we will not recommend, waiving a second hearing. Then we have policies that are up, for rescind and replace or for review. And so the first policy we have is policy 9300, ethical standards for board members. And you should have a copy of the revised 9300 code of conduct for board members and a copy of the current policy ethical standards for board members, same number 9300. So it was a total rewrite. And one of the things that I will point out to you that is a definitive note is on line 39 of the new policy where it talks about. This is under procedures for censure or other disciplinary action, and it talks about requiring a 2/3 vote, not a majority vote of the board members present and voting in order to decide or determine that a disciplinary action concerning a board member would be, may be appropriate. And then again, in line 52, it requires for any action of censure or other disciplinary action regarding a board member or cause following an informal hearing, it will require a 2/3 vote of all members of the board. So those are the two main things, and that is consistent with all the other bylaws in the 9,000 series where we consistently ask for a 2/3 vote either of the entire board or of those present and voting, depending upon the situation. And I didn't know if anyone wanted to discuss anything within this policy. One of the wordings I was not too thrilled with would be from lines 32 to 40. So it says, if the board determines as a result of such discussion that censure or other disciplinary action concerning a board member may be appropriate, the board shall provide the board member with a reasonable written notice of the board's intent to consider censure or other disciplinary action, including the factual basis for the claimed cause for the censure or disciplinary action against the member, with such notice to be provided after being authorized by a 2/3 vote of those board members present and voting. And I kind of feel like that whole thing about the 2/3 vote should come first, like there must be a 2/3 vote by the board of those present and voting in order to determine that there is a censure or, I mean, I'm not really sure how to word it, but I feel like it's like coming after.
Well, but you shall provide the board member with, and you need an object of the proposition to be extremely pedantical.
Oh, that's,
So,
I mean,
just because that's if the board determines as a result of such discussion, but in order to determine it, you need that 2/3 vote to determine it. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like, I wasn't sure.
well, but it says with such notice to be provided after being authorized by a 2/3 vote. So basically, you have the discussion like, hey, someone did something they shouldn't have done and it's censure worthy and we should consider censoring them. And then someone makes the motion and you have a further discussion about it and then you vote. And then if you get a 2/3 vote in favor of the censure, then you would provide written notice to the of the board's intent to consider censure or other disciplinary action.
I guess like, if you were to think about, like, how would this play out? Someone feels a board member needs disciplinary action. So here's the following procedure, right? The board shall review the performance and or conduct of the board member in open or executive session as determined by the board and the board member in accordance with FOIA at a regular or special meeting of the board prior to initiating any action to censure or to take other disciplinary action. If the board determines as a result of such discussion that censure or other disciplinary action concerning a board member may be appropriate, the board shall provide the board member with. So here they're already determining. Says the board determines that censure or disciplinary action is appropriate. But then under A, it tells you how they determined it. It has to be determined by a 2/3 vote. So I feel like that's the horse coming before the cart.
Yeah, but that's only voting to provide notice of intent to consider censure. Right?
If you, yeah, if you think about it,
That's not the censure vote
the board
itself.
shall review the performance and conduct, that would have to be an agenda item. Or at least added to an agenda. Right?
Or adding an executive.
Correct, anybody could add it, provided it's voted as an agenda item. And then. And then that would have to pass by a simple majority, and no, then you'd have to have the 2/3 take action on it. Am I confused?
But the action in this A is not actual action of the censure, it's the written notice of the intent to consider censure
Right, oh, yeah, I see, so.
or disciplinary action. And then B is when, under 3, it's when you finally decide to take action, then it's 2/3 of the entire
Right.
board.
But to go from 1 to 2, what do you need? A simple majority.
Sounds like. Well, first they would have to get on the agenda.
First on the agenda, then a simple majority, right? And then a 2/3 vote to.
Of those present
Of those present
and voting.
to consider censure with to offer written notice to consider censure, right?
I guess.
But one could see. The threat of censure also being abused. And so you might want the vote to consider censure to also be by 2/3. And then the action to censure or discipline also 2/3.
Well, one is 2/3 of those present and voting, and the actual action of discipline is 2/3 of the entire board.
Yeah, but I still think 2/3 is a better
It's the old,
imperative
it's the
to,
old process is the punishment kind of problem.
yeah.
Just, the one piece, though, we have to consider is it only takes 3 board members to put something on the agenda. So 3 board members can put censure on the agenda, but it then doesn't have to be
Right,
considered. Doesn't have to go through, right,
Right. So we put on the agenda and then it would be,
it could fail 6-3.
right.
Right.
But then if it's something. I guess like how would the entire board know whether or not it should be on the agenda, like to vote to have it in discussion if you don't know what it's about? If it's like gonna be an executive session, it has to get to executive session first.
Correct.
If the board member chooses that,
Mhm.
which probably I would assume most board members would, that don't know what's going on,
Right.
It's one of those weird situations because.
I just wanna
It
make
has
it
to
very
initiate
clear.
from somewhere.
Right.
And I
feel
think that
it's
would
a
be the
little
three
unclear
board members.
how to get there.
Piece.
Do you know what I'm saying?
I think that would be the 3 board members requesting to put it on the agenda.
Right, but then like only those 3 board members would like really know what, it's possible that those 3 are the only ones that know what the beef is about, right?
Yeah.
So then to put it on the agenda in order for the entire board to find out, is this worthy? you know, you would have to discuss it, and then I think then it would already have to go to executive session. I just feel like it needs to be a little cleaner, and I'm just uncertain.
Well, I mean, I think that maybe we can put clarify in writing in, but maybe. You know, maybe we specify that if 3 board members put it on, request for it to be put on an executive. Committee, an executive session agenda. Then it gets placed on the executive session agenda for the board to discuss so that there's an understanding of what the claimed.
Right, because
Misconduct
you can't
is.
determine if there was misconduct until you know what the conduct was.
Then you can't vote in executive session.
Exactly.
And the person could say, no, I wanna have it in public session, you're not gonna talk about me in executive session. You know, I don't know what this is about, but you know, some people would take that tact,
Well, then they could just do that at when you make the motion, right? Because if it gets on the agenda by the 3 who wanted it on the agenda, then it's on the agenda, and then you would make the motion, second the motion, and then discuss, and under that discussion, you would find out, you know, because it's not special executive session.
But if somebody does want it handled in executive session. And not publicly aired,
Then maybe you would just have to postpone it to the next meeting with an executive session. Maybe that's how you would do it.
and I would say typically, and unfortunately, having lived through it. The 3 members are not shy about sharing what the
Mhm.
reasons would be, because they're trying to convince 3 other members to vote with them. So,
But
but still the person who's alleged to have conducted misconduct. May not know what they're talking.
correct, so we
Right.
would say censure of board member X potential executive session. Board member gets it.
I think maybe we need to build in here something where the matter is not aired initially. When 3 board members request to put it on an agenda. And that triggers the ability of the person who's allegedly committed the misconduct. To state on the record whether they'd prefer to have an initial discussion on the record or an executive session. And then that covers both contingencies. If they want to do it executive session, then we can table it and make sure that there's an executive session the following meeting. And if they want to do it publicly, you know, we could vote to add it to that agenda and do it then.
Right, so are we in agreement then, or are we not in agreement, that we need to wordsmith this a little better, or are we happy with how it is?
I think we need to review the process, think through how the process would actually work. When I look at the 5 provisions here, 4 of them are more or less objective. The second one is a little bit more subjective, conduct themselves in a fair and impartial manner. That each member of the board shall act in complete accordance with the provisions and tenor of this policy. Tenor is a little bit of a fudge factor, right?
Yeah.
But I do think we need to think through how it actually works. I mean, you want transparency, of course, but you don't want baseless allegations being
Right,
slung
I don't
around.
want to slander.
And I wouldn't recommend putting the 3 board member piece in here because that's covered somewhere.
That's right.
Oh,
that's
right,
right.
yeah,
I agree
yeah.
I agree with that.
I take that could change or.
Yeah, we could just say upon, you know, upon the addition of an agenda item to discuss discipline or
Alright, let's table that for now.
censure.
We'll think on it, you have some epiphany of how it should be worded, email me. And Zoe and I can work on it and come up with a little more clear process.
And then, just to be clear, the numbered one is the proposal from Shipman and Goodman,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, it's much more specific, narrowly targeted and.
Yeah.
Then.
Yeah, the other one says current policy on the top, and it's, the old one is called ethical standards for board members, and the new one is code of conduct for board members. But it's the same policy number. All right, so we'll table that one for now. So now we're gonna go to policy 9310, conflict of interest. You will find a new revised version and a current policy on it. The new revised is much more brief. And Shipman and Goodwin say they recommend their model bylaw conflict of interest. So they had recommended, which we did, to adopt policy 4114 nepotism. We did that in October. And so you have a hard copy of that in your packet for reference. And we worked hard on that. So that pretty much covers, you know, anything to do with employment of relatives of board members. It's covered under that policy in the 4000 series. So they recommend repeal and replace the current policy 9310 board member conflict of interest with their model bylaw conflict of interest.
The only thing I saw that we lost, and maybe not have lost, is the appearance of conflict of interest, which is written in the original, the current policy. And I don't see any reference to that in the proposed policy. I'm not saying it needs it, I'm just saying, in the very first paragraph, it says, but be alert to situations which have the appearance of a conflict of interest.
Yeah, which is very subjective. Your concern is subjectivity.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
And maybe it's
I don't know, I mean,
good to strike that out.
some days I'm not so alert. I don't really like that wording, the old policy.
I'm sure you would do not.
I do not.
Okay,
I do not like the wording of to be alert to situation. It seems kind of
Yeah.
fudgy.
yeah, I mean, this one clearly, the proposed one clearly limits. Conflict of interest to not working personally for the Board of Education while you're a Board of Ed member.
Yeah.
You know, so you can't take a teaching position or even a substitute teaching position.
Yeah.
Or anything like that, or be a social worker or something for the district if you are a board member. And if you take a job, then your board position is immediately vacated. And then we have rules for how to handle vacated positions, but there's nothing here about the pecuniary interests. In other words, if you're making money from some, you know, endeavor, like as a contractor or a consultant or something like that, is that contained in the new policy we passed?
I believe that's in the nepotism one.
Yeah, but was that only involving nepotism? Because if it is, then that has nothing to do with pecuniary interests. And I'm not saying that we need to have a policy that prohibits that. I'm just saying, you know, are we losing something there?
Well, there's disclosure requirements in the nepotism policy. Talking about familial relationships between the board member or administrator or employee. No, I think that was in the old nepotism policy and it's not in the new. So I see what you're saying.
Now, the other question is, does our town charter have ethical provisions that would prevent that, for example? So we still also have to obey the town charter
Right.
as board members.
I
So
don't remember,
it'd be
because
redundant.
I don't remember so much the new town charter versus the old.
Yeah, but I don't think that provision was. Well, I shouldn't say that. I don't know if any.
I don't think there's actually a lot in the town charter that refers to Board of Ed. It's like the
Very small now.
Yeah.
very, it's like it was bigger and now it's smaller.
But there is stuff that applies to elected board members. Right, elected and appointed board members, and that would apply to us too, I think. Look, Shipman and Goodwin wants to keep it very tight. They recommend keeping it very tight.
Right.
I'm not recommending that we go beyond what they're recommending. I just, you know,
Yeah, but I see what you're saying, because I'm wondering if it says it somewhere else. And I feel like somewhere else it says it, but I don't know off the top of my head.
It's one area covered in the current policy that's somewhat common, and it happens more in this instance. Spouse works for the district, somebody gets elected to the board, so they're one of the 300 teachers of town, and so should that board member vote on the teacher's contract? Should they participate in the the bargaining,
Right.
collective bargaining, things like that? Typically, it's said that they can participate because
It doesn't apply only to their
yes, right,
spouse.
yes.
Their spouse is just one in a large class of.
But oftentimes that, I've seen that board member not vote, abstaining just because of that.
Yeah, and usually conflicts of interest are up to the official to waive or to elect. So, there's conduct that's strictly proscribed, and there's conduct that says, well, if there's an appearance, then it's up to the official to determine whether they want to vote or not. And then it's that official's determination whether or not they want to vote on it. If you're voting on your own pension, that's a direct pecuniary interest to yourself. I mean, you should really clearly recuse yourself from voting on that. But, as a board member, if you have a spouse who happens to be employed by the district, that's a much further attenuated pecuniary relationship that applies across the board to that whole bargaining unit and not just your spouse. So, that board member might choose to go ahead and vote on, participate and vote. But there's nothing about any of that in this conflict, the new proposed conflict of interest language.
No.
Part of the reason why I think Shipman and Goodwin keeps that so tightly drawn is because we live in a small community and board members usually serve in a smallish community, and they're going to be related to people who are contractors, and they're going to have family members who teach, and you know what I mean? Like they're going to have very good friends whose kids serve, whose kids are up for expulsion. There's all kinds of potential areas to consider whether there's a conflict. Most of them don't really amount to an actual conflict.
Right.
Unless money is changing hands, and this version doesn't even have anything about money changing hands. So.
Well, we could go back to Shipman and Goodwin and ask them, is there a reason that they took that wording out? Because maybe there is, or.
I think it's along the lines, because I've heard this discussed before, like at conferences, like at CAPE. It's.
I mean, if you have a child in the school system, then, do you have to recuse yourself from every single,
Exactly,
student hearing or, so I think if you do have, too many exclusions, too many, because it does say like in the old policy, it doesn't say that you cannot, it just says, operations must be guarded with particular care so that there is no real or seeming conflict of interest. I mean, we could put some type of wording back into the policy with that, and then that's at least addressed, but really up to, the board members themselves to determine if there is a conflict.
It's up to the board member to determine themselves, but if 2/3 of the rest of the board believe that they should have recused themselves,
Right.
then you're gonna go back to the one that we just agreed on, there's gonna be a disciplinary hearing.
Potentially. Well, I mean, I think,
Or a censure hearing.
I would think that most boards work in a rather nice setting. I mean, where you're not all at each other's throats. So if there was a concern by other board members that there would be a potential conflict of interest or it looks bad for the board, most likely they would say to the board member, right, like, maybe not, right, maybe you should recuse yourself, and they probably would. I mean, I could see that happening on our board. Now, if there is, a board that does not get along, right, or a conflict between the board and the superintendent or something, then I could see it being more of a problem. So,
And we may be blessed to have a board that largely collaborates, you know, recently, but that I've been on boards that have been much more lathered up. You know, so.
I mean, we can table this one for now and kind of like, maybe find out if there's a reason that Shipman and Goodwin wanted to keep it so tight. You know, I'm sure they have experience with this.
Yeah, we can ask them, questions, I guess. Share.
And then, you know, if there is no reasoning behind, well, not that there's no reason behind, but there's not anything particular that they don't want us to have it or recommend that we don't have it, we could put another line in just saying about, you know, the appearance of conflict of interest and the pecuniary interests, that type of thing, and just make it a real brief statement so that it's not too specific, or too, you know, restrictive. Something like that, see what they can come up with. Does that sound good?
Well, whatever it is, it's gonna be subjective.
Well, yeah. So, another one. This is not going like that, but.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all right. We have no deadlines here. All right, so the next policy then is policy 9440, board superintendent relationship. Shipman and Goodwin said the bylaw could be repealed because it's not necessary, but we would like to keep it. The administration would like to keep it. Dr. Cook would like to keep it.
Yeah, I find it to be more of like a CADE policy than versus a Shipman policy or bylaw, but I do think it's effective to kind of share board responsibilities and superintendent responsibilities in another area as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of nice just that it sort of describes the relationship and that we make policy, we don't administer policy.
Clarifies things for the public.
Yeah.
And I think it clarifies things for board members and ought to be reread from time to time. Eventually.
Yeah.
Good idea.
All right, so if we're in agreement with that one, 9440, that will go to the board's recommendation for rescinding in place. Phew, okay, now let's skip to parliamentarian, we're gonna come back to student representatives. 9540.5 parliamentarian. So this one they didn't think that we needed, but I will tell you why I want it. Not because I'm parliamentarian, but because I think I have seen that there are times when procedure needs to be followed, and I think it often sounds better coming from the designated parliamentarian saying, okay, we need a motion for this, or you can't talk about this, or this is gonna be a illegal meeting if you continue or try to talk about things when you shouldn't, as opposed to, you know, having the board chair say something or have other members telling other members, hey, you can't do that. It becomes more of a personal thing. I think if it comes from the designated parliamentarian, it is not personal. It's just, these are the rules, these are the procedures, this is what you have to do.
And it's also the keeper of the book, like you can turn to someone who can actually, and you carry the book with you, you can actually open the book and say, well, here's what
Also, I
it
have it on
says.
Kindle.
Yeah, well, exactly, well, that's what I mean.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. Those are good things. So the only change here really is that we added newly revised, because Robert's Rules of Order are newly revised, or otherwise known as RONR. So if we're in agreement with that, then we will move that forward, that we're sending in place. Yep. Okay, policy 9540.12, broadcasting and taping of meetings. And this one, we would like to keep in. It's not required, and Shipman and Goodwin recommended repeal, but I would like to keep it, and it's been reviewed and updated to ensure legal compliance. And the reasoning is because there have been times when we have more of the public attending our meetings, and, you know, they have the right to video or record if they so wish. It is a public meeting, and we do broadcast it, the taped meeting. But we don't want to interfere with the business of the meeting. And so this limits what they can do. For instance, they can sit in the audience and they can record, but they can't sit there and like narrate loudly so that it interrupts our meeting. They can't come forward and stand in front of Seth while he's trying to you know, conduct business at the Board of Ed meeting. They would have to stay back so that there is no disturbance or obstruction for the video or anything else. And so that's why we wanted to keep this in, just for some rules that the public can refer to of what they can and cannot do in a public meeting. So there have been a lot of revisions on this. You can see there's a lot that's just been taken out. And that we do provide video recordings on the school district's internet website. So any other comments or questions or discussion?
I agree with you, thank you.
Okay, so now we are up to policy 3542.4 meal charging. And I did ask Zoe to make sure that Art Sickle had reviewed the changes in the policy and that he was happy with them versus what the current policy is. The current policy is called lunch charging, and the new revised version would be called meal charging. And it is a significantly longer policy. And I don't know if anyone else has comments, but of course I'll leave the comments. So one of the questions that I had about this was when you look at line 11, charging meals, and you read that paragraph from 12 to 20. So it says, students whose accounts have insufficient funds and who do not bring a meal or other funds to school to pay for meals may charge meals to their meal accounts. Students will be informed of their right to purchase a meal, which excludes a la carte items for any school breakfast, lunch, or other meal offered by the district, even if the student's account has insufficient funds. The board prohibits publicly identifying or shaming a student for any unpaid meal charges, including but not limited to the following: delaying or refusing to serve a meal to the student, designating a specific meal option for the student, or otherwise taking any disciplinary action against the student. Now, I agree in theory with everything that says. However, if you think about what would happen in a real life setting, the student goes and gets a meal and comes up to pay. They have their little card, because they don't take cash, they don't have card. So how do we enforce that whomever is going to be charging the meal, knowing that they can't have a la carte items, does not say to the student, you can't have the a la carte items? Because that is specifically designating a specific meal option for the student, which is prohibited. So that's my problem with this. How do you do that?
Well, I think designating a specific meal option for the student means, like in the old days, if you didn't have money, you got peanut butter and jelly, and that's it. Or a cheese sandwich. Cheese sandwich. Yeah. And I don't think it really intends to mean that you don't get the a la carte stuff. But it sounds like that they have to have a discussion in private with the kid that says, look, if you're always charging and you have insufficient funds, you can have a meal, but you can't have the bells and whistles with it.
Right, but if, let's say you're at hand, right, there's a hot meal option that you can have, which is like, it's actually a variety of things.
Yeah.
But then there are the things that you cannot have. And I'm not even certain which is which. I know that there are designations, because there's the, you know, well, you can, they have so many options, right?
We'll use an example. So if
Yeah,
somebody
yeah.
brings up a hint water, they can not have the hint water, they can have a regular water or
So then how do you tell that student that they can't charge that without telling them that they can't charge that or have that?
I think that it doesn't, I don't know that we're perfect in the implementation of that. I know there's been issues in the past, but we have talked to staff before about. You nicely do what you tell them next time. When you charge them for the hit water, the charges is added to the account, but you say. You're behind on your account, please put money on your account, next time you'll be able to charge, but you can't have the a la carte item, it's how
But they
I prefer
can't.
it to be.
Do that according to this. The board prohibits publicly identifying or shaming a student for any unpaid meal charges, including but not limited to delaying or refusing to serve a meal to a student, designating a specific meal option. To me, that sounds kind of like the same thing.
It's a copy and paste of state law, that language right
Is
there.
it?
So, yes, so which is why we added it in.
Oh, okay.
He wanted it.
So we can't really change that. It just
Correct.
sounds kind of like,
It may sound clunky and it may not look as perfect in actual
I should have known it
practice.
came from Hartford.
Yeah, it is.
That is the reason that update is coming, and you can see this policy in particular has a very, very long list of citations that goes along with it. You can look it up, this is an actual technique,
So that
as recommended by Shannon.
okay, so we'll keep it as it states, but then in the implementation, then how does our cafeteria staff handle that situation?
We've had lots of conversations with them through Joe Baracco and because I have had parent complaints about that. I mean, I will say too, as a district, we're extremely lenient on charges. We allow students to charge well beyond the 5 meals certainly. And we have, we make efforts eventually, the schools calling, things like that. But I think that's gotta be handled delicately, because then you're getting to shame, one of the complaints I received was the student was told, you gotta put back that water, that specialty water, you can have this or that, and so that's in front of everybody else in line, and the line at hand is huge, so. We'll try to work that out by informing them that they have a charge.
Well, or, maybe reaching out to the family and enlisting their assistance, say, hey, look, they could charge a meal, that's fine. Here's what the a la carte items are that they can't charge.
We do communicate that, but I think sometimes it can go under pretty quick, because the student may get a meal that totals $6 because of what they add on to it, or $7 even, so it can go, start of the week, it looks pretty good, by Friday, suddenly buy your friend a meal too, and then you're underneath, so we do have a lot of leniency in that basis until, the school will start getting involved, and the assistant principal may call them.
And do we still have a stop loss agreement with Chartwells that basically when we get to a certain amount, they cover the difference?
Yeah, 75,000, and we're in negotiations now to.
All right, so I guess, that was my only problem with the wording, but since it comes from Hartford.
It's a pretty boilerplate.
So I guess that's just up to the administration to handle in the most delicate manner, and we'll just write policy and you can administer it.
Yes.
Like my favorite quote, okay. So before we do the 4000s, we're gonna go back and we're gonna bring policy 8201, student representation on the Board of Ed, and 9490, student representatives, and we're gonna take those two out. Read the back. So Shipman and Goodwin recommend reprinting policy 8201, student representation on the Board of Ed. And the reason I wanted to look at these together is because policy 9490, student representatives, is a very small, tidy, short, brief new policy. But 8201 actually talks about procedures, about how the students are chosen. And the student representatives bylaw 9490 just simply says that we will have 2 high school students serve as representatives, and that they do not attend executive sessions and they do not vote. So I didn't know if the committee wanted to sort of combine the policies and have under 9490 some sort of like procedure for choosing the representatives, or if there is some other way that it's done. And since I've never been actually involved in that process, I thought, Dr. Cook and Seth could speak to that, and then, tell me what you think. Seth, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was behind because I was
All right, then you have.
trying to find
the
out.
floor is
I have
yours.
a question.
Oh, yes,
Do we follow the procedure?
We do not do all of that, so we do an interview that the board chair or designee participates on for the student. I do not believe it
well,
comes.
isn't it like the students have to say that they're
Yeah,
interested, right, like
yes.
they apply
Submit
for it?
essays and then they're read, it's a very rewarding.
Yes,
process.
yeah,
All right, I'm trying to get my daughter.
But it's not the student council that recommends.
correct, right, yeah, they do apply and then the orientation session is actually done by TJ. I typically have met the students by that point, but you know, he does the orientation.
So, I mean, do we wanna put the process in under student representatives? I kind of want to, because I think it's like a nice place to put it. However, once it's in the bylaws, then like it has to be followed and you can't change it.
So we could work with the high school and Seth and just make sure we've got, you know, come up with a recommendation, bring it back next time.
Sure,
It works with how we do it now.
yeah, because this is not right.
In theory, is it open to anybody who wants to apply right now?
It's, we've always had a junior and a senior.
Right,
So
right, but
it'd always be a junior, yes,
But any
but
junior
any
could,
junior could apply, or any.
or any rising,
sophomore,
rising,
yes,
right, yeah, so, okay.
But I mean, technically, according to our current policy, it could be a freshman, could be a sophomore. It doesn't say junior, senior.
Correct, I think that would be a good clarification of what, yeah.
And what happens if the senior moves out of town if a junior serves 1 year and then they move out of town, so there's a senior vacancy.
Well, right, where they say this is, you know, too much and doing
Yeah.
things, we have good attendance, but
All right, so you guys can work on the actual policies that we do. And then we can just put a little brief thing into the new 9490 of how we do it. And then that'll be next. And another one to work on. All right. So. All right, so we're gonna wait on 8201 and work with it for 9490, and we're waiting on 9300, and we're waiting on 9310. And so now the last one on our agenda tonight, we have 10 minutes, is the 4,000 series gifts to employees that we have talked about before. So this is a rewording. Didn't we choose a number though? Did we choose 4,000 or? Did we pick a number? I thought we picked a number like 40 or something.
That was never just, yeah, maybe we pick 40, you know.
Pick something that sounded, you know, symmetrical. Well-rounded. All right, so the way this is written, I know you have something to say, Maureen, so I'll let you lead.
I don't know, go ahead.
So we had talked about in the last 1 or 2 committee meetings about whether or not we should actually designate a specific number as to what is reasonable or appropriate or inappropriate or something like that. And when we were working on the rewording of this, I just feel like if you put in a number, you know, you're gonna have to keep changing the policy before you really need to, because, you know, inflation, times change, what, you know, in the 1930s, what was, you know, considered a huge number now is like nothing. So, and again, and we had this discussion before, if you've got, you know, 50 members on a team and they each give $10 or $5 for a coach gift versus, you know, 5 members on the team or whatever, that's a ridiculous number. But anyway, you get my drift. So, thoughts, Maureen?
I don't know, I mean, I mentioned last time, I think there should be a dollar amount in there because it could get quite high. And even if it's a little high right now, at least give us some guidelines and give us a few years. For the, at least for the policy to still be okay, and if we have to revisit it for that purpose, I don't see that as being very big deal.
What number do you want?
That I don't know. I would look to Dr. Cook for that, because, you know, like you said, if everybody's giving $10, but you know, which isn't a lot, but it's a huge team. That could be a really extraordinary gift, whereas. You know, as Dr. Cook pointed out last time, we've had teachers turn down expensive gifts in the past. That were less than that one might be,
right,
so.
What we could do is we could have two separate numbers. One can be in a contributory gift where several or all class members or team members are joining in a unitary gift, that nobody should make a donation of more than $10, $20, something like that. And then also, no aggregate gift should be accepted in an amount greater than $500, $1,000, something like that. And, you know,
So I was thinking that, not with regard to numbers, but a change that we could make that maybe might be helpful. If you look at line 14, starts at 13, any gift thought to be inappropriate or monetarily exorbitant shall not be accepted by the employee as determined by the employee's responsible administrator or administrator's designee. So I'm thinking, what if we put in something that like, that they must report it to the
that's,
administrator?
there's no requirement here, it's
Right.
implied
You say
that they
if,
report.
but again, it would be sort of arbitrary. So, because it's saying a gift thought to be inappropriate or monetarily exorbitant shall not be accepted. But and
One of the-
reported to,
One of
or,
the examples I thought of is, so first grade student comes in at Christmas time and gives earrings to the first grade teacher. She looks at them, doesn't look that expensive, they look nice, but she keep them, how does she determine how much they are? If it's, we said, $25. Well, how does she determine how much that is, or if it's a bottle of wine or something like that, like how are we
well,
determining?
wine's not allowed at school for us, so.
People have different perceptions about what
Right,
is.
well, I mean, just because it says any gift thought to be inappropriate or monetarily exorbitant shall
And
not be
honestly, I don't think
accepted.
they're opening the gifts until they leave, like, so.
Right, they're not gonna know right
Yeah,
away.
it's home for break and then they
Then
go
they're like, what do
uncomfortable
I
and
have
don't
to
need
do?
to.
Oh,
whereas if it's just black and white, it would be better.
Maybe something along the lines of, if an employee accepts a gift that they feel is questionable, that they should report it to their administrator.
I think that would,
Something like that,
Yeah.
to determine appropriate action, I don't know, just.
Yeah, because otherwise, I mean, you're making the administrator responsible for dividing whether or not someone got a gift to begin with.
I mean, I don't want them,
Yeah.
I got a hand soap, doing,
Yeah.
but.
I mean, who? That puts the onus on them to determine if it's too much or not, or someone might think that a $500 gift's too much and someone else might not think it's not,
I mean,
But then you have that problem with trying to
nothing
identify.
against personnel, but we know what the teachers make, so.
But that's why I'm thinking it'd be a good idea to have a dollar amount in there so that, and then people collecting the money would also know that this is, I can hold this.
Well, think about it, the real reason that you don't want a large gift to be exchanged is because you don't want to create favoritism to the person or people who gave the gift, right? Toward that person or group
Right.
by the teacher, right? Oh, these kids get an A next semester.
Right,
You know what I mean?
or any feelings that
Or-
they owe them something in return.
Yeah, exactly, or like coaches, my kid's gonna get more playing time if I give them Broadway tickets, or you know what I mean? So I think we have to kind of leave it to the subjective analysis of the building administrator who knows the circumstances better.
Right, but the
Right,
initial
But there
determination
needs to be,
has to come from the employee.
there needs to be like a, hey, this is questionable, I need to report it.
And that would also be a conversation that Craig would have with his staff, I think, too, because the different administrators could have put their different feelings.
And again, if it's like a team that has 60, students on it. Of course, that, collective gift is gonna be larger than the team that has, 3 students. Or something.
But also, like, I don't want to exclude the possibility of, and I don't know if you read this in the news, but there was I think it was a private school that they had a bus driver who did you read this or no?
was it custodian, I'm thinking.
Was it a custodian? Yeah,
Yeah.
no, there was a, he was a bus driver and he hadn't been home to his native country to see his family.
No, he
And the
was a
whole-
security guard at a dorm in college.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
whatever, I made it up, but,
Yeah,
so,
so-
but you know what I mean, like, I don't want to exclude the idea of if the community, if the school community was like, hey, like,
Right.
you know, this teacher needs to go home and see family and it's far away and, you know, and
Or a
everybody's like.
GoFundMe for someone who's sick or something, coach that falls ill, you know. I don't think this addresses that, so I
Right.
think,
Okay,
you know,
it'll be different. Well, technically, it's still a gift for an employee. It's just, it's from who, right? So
well, we could add something that says this is not,
I just don't want to regulate everything.
I know.
I mean, there has to be some level of common sense that you accept, right? That people are not. I'm not gonna finish this.
Not to exclude, this is not to exclude community collections or GoFundMe.
Well, crowdsourcing.
Crowdsourcing in extraordinary circumstances.
I don't even know the legality of that in a school setting, so.
Or this could be the standard, but any exceptions would need to be approved by the school. Or something, I think if there was a GoFundMe, they would just.
And crowdsourcing is actually covered by our fundraising policy.
Yeah, right.
Ah, thank you. Okay, so back to this policy. Did we find out what number we named this or no?
No, I just picked one for you, 4,400.
Oh, I like that one. Okay.
44,
Are we good with 4,400?
it's got a good ring.
You get me. Okay, so, so how do we want to word this in 1 minute? Any gift thought to be inappropriate or monetarily exorbitant shall not be accepted by an employee and should be reported to the appropriate administrator to determine, I don't know, help me out here, somebody down.
How about just add a sentence at the end after designate period? It says something along the lines of, when an employee receives a gift of questionable scale, they haven't, you know, they shall report.
We could just use the same wording. When an employee receives a gift thought to be inappropriate or monetarily exorbitant.
How about when
And
it,
they've already reported to the administrator though.
how
Line
about when
14.
they receive a gift,
Well, that's true.
how about when they receive a gift over $500, it'll be reported? And that doesn't mean they can't keep it, it just means that others are going to know about it, help make that determination. In which case, the determination might be, okay, you know, 50 kids each gave $10, this is okay. Or the determination could be, this is from 4 people, this isn't okay. So there is a dollar amount on it, it just means it has to be discussed or disclosed. And then the administrator can have, make the decision to talk to them.
It's okay up to that dollar amount. So I know you were given a high dollar amount just to kind of keep it out of the common occurrence, but then that says, oh, I could give something for
Right.
$450.
Right.
That's what I'm worried about. I just worry about a dollar amount. We have them running it by an administrator. I think they're gonna make a good judgment. If they're unsure, they're gonna call me. Like every time we have a new policy introduced, then we go over it as administrators, so I'll review.
Okay,
That this took several meetings with the policy committee, and we're, you know, they're a little concerned about this.
well, maybe they have ideas and feedback, I don't know, have you discussed it with them, that dollar should be?
Not this one in particular, a lot of the policies you do see have run through, but this one, not in particular.
All right, how about any gift thought to be inappropriate or monetarily exorbitant shall not be accepted by the employee and shall be reported to the employee's responsible administrator or administrator's designee.
Well,
I don't even know if we need an appropriate there.
how about
We need
this?
to know about monetarily.
well, how about any gift thought to be inappropriate or monetarily exorbitant shall be reported to the building administrator and may not be accepted by the employee as determined by the employee's responsible administrator. That's a big.
That sounded a little to me like they may not accept it. And you're actually trying to say they may or may not be accepting it.
It's in May.
And may not be accepted by the employee if so determined by the employee's administrator.
That needs a little work, it sounds.
Any gift thought to be inappropriate or monetarily exorbitant shall be reported to the employee's responsible administrator or administrator's designee, who will determine.
If the gift could be accepted.
Maybe, I think it's maybe excessive.
Yes? No?
I think that works. We can bring it to the board and look at it again, you
Alright,
know, if we.
did you get this?
Oh.
Yeah, we'll watch the tape.
We'll work it out, yeah, alright, so, that's the last one, we have public comment?
No.